Roger has 20 years of legal experience right here in Missouri. His experience includes prosecution, criminal defense, family law, and civil litigation, which gives him a balanced perspective on the diverse issues facing Boone County courts. As Boone County Prosecutor, Roger has implemented significant reforms aimed at improving the justice system. These initiatives include shifting the focus for simple drug possession from prosecution to treatment through drug court referrals, while increasing penalties for drug dealers. Roger also created a program to better keep victims informed of case progress by text messages, as well as a voucher system to ensure victims have transportation to court proceedings. And Roger, please tell us more about your experience when you get to the campaign portion of your presentation. But now we welcome you to tell us about the Boone County court system.
All right. Yeah. All right. Thank you, everybody, for having me. I've got a slideshow, and so I've got that shared on my screen. I was asked to talk about a little bit just about some of the functions of the court and how the court operates, and then also talk a little bit about the campaign and what's going on in the campaign. So I'll start with my slideshow. With a title slide like this, you know you're in for a treat. So the Missouri has 46 judicial circuits. Boone County is in the 13th circuit. Historically, there were fewer circuit judges, and they would ride circuit, and so they would have multiple counties that they would go to and appear at the courthouses on different days, which they call their law days. And so 46 circuits in the state overall. Boone County is in the 13th circuit with Callaway County. So Boone and Callaway are the 13th circuit. There's also in Missouri the Court of Appeals divided up into 3 districts. We're in the Western District Court of Appeals here, and then the Missouri Supreme Court is for the whole state of Missouri. I had questions as well about how judges are elected. And so Missouri is famous for coming up with the Missouri Plan, the nonpartisan selection plan for judges. And in the most populous parts of the state, that's how the judges are selected. And so there's a theoretically nonpartisan group of individuals who nominate a slate of 3 candidates to the governor, and the governor chooses one of those proposed candidates, or could reject all 3, but generally would choose one of those 3 candidates. In most of the rest of the state, the judges are elected by partisan elections, and so Boone County is one of those jurisdictions or one of those counties where the judges are elected rather than appointed. Again, Boone County is in the 13th judicial circuit, but the way that things are divided up, there used to be separate courts just because of the weird history of how our legal system developed from the English legal system, where there were separate courts of chancery and justice. And so in the United States now, they've merged those into one unified court system. But there are still a circuit level and an associate circuit level. The circuit level is a general court of jurisdiction, and so they can handle any type of case. But there's a split with the associate court is a limited court of jurisdiction that they can hear misdemeanor cases, and they can hear civil cases up to $25,000. There are a large number of other types of cases that are heard by both circuit and associate circuit judges. They have family law cases, landlord-tenant cases, small claims, probate, juvenile, and then there are also here municipal divisions. And now the associate judges handle the municipal divisions, with the exception of the city of Columbia, where there's a municipal judge, Judge Nosh. So here, this is a list of almost all of our judges and commissioners. And so, like I said, the other difference, I got ahead of myself, the other difference between circuit judges and associate circuit judges is the circuit judge serves for the whole county. And so our judges travel back and forth to Callaway County. They generally have law day in Callaway County once a month for each of the circuit judges, and then one has a more specialized time there. The associate judges generally are only in the county where they were elected. And so the election for associate judges is just Boone County here, but for circuit judges, the election is both Boone and Callaway County. There are times when an associate judge could be appointed to hear cases in the other county, and that happens if the presiding judge appoints them to do so. This is Josh Devine, who's our presiding judge here. In the distant past, Judge England from Callaway County had a docket here in Boone County, but in Callaway County, it's gotten quite busy there, and so the Callaway County associate judges don't generally come over to Boone County now. Overall, there were also questions about how things are assigned, and so that's the presiding judge as well. The presiding judge has administrative duties and assigns judges to dockets and assigns caseloads. The judges as a group meet together to vote on certain things as a body. They have court en banc meetings, but a lot of the administrative work is done by now Judge Devine. And that includes assigning what the caseloads are. So this is actually just the criminal dockets, because this is our prosecutor's version of the trial schedule or the hearing schedule. And the judges each have an AM and PM docket, and generally speaking, the associate judges have a full schedule throughout the week of AM and PM dockets.
Roger,
Mm-hmm.
just a question. You mentioned associate circuit and circuit,
Mm-hmm.
and then presiding. Is
Yeah.
presiding something different? I missed that.
So the presiding judge is elected by the court en banc, and so that's each circuit has a presiding judge. And then here it's our circuit judge, Josh Devine, is our presiding judge.
Okay.
So they have a term, and then the judges get together and elect a presiding judge. Immediately preceding that, it was Judge Jacobs, but then the presiding judge duties, I think, are difficult, and so yeah, it's definitely extra service and work on their part to take on those tasks. And so currently, Judge Devine is handling that work. But they divide up the dockets and case assignments just based on the judges available and the needs at the time. So in a couple of years ago, and my first assistant Melissa Buchanan's here, so you can help me a little bit on this too. A couple of years ago, we had all 4 associate divisions doing criminal cases. Now there are only two divisions doing criminal cases. But they really just divide things up based on the workload. So case Judge Jackson Williams, the judge that she replaced in the election had been the family court judge, but they switched things around because her background is more in civil work and criminal work. And so now she does a general docket, and the circuit judges as well as Judge Pearman handle the family cases, and of course the family court commissioner. So each of them have a docket that's assigned, and they'll handle different things on the different docket schedules or the different docket slots. And these are all criminal because this is just how we assign our people to cover one of those dockets. The circuit judges currently is Judge Brooke Jacobs, Judge Stephanie Morrill, Judge Josh Devine, Judge Jeff Harris, and then Judge Miller from Callaway County, who under a complicated system that the state has, they decide which circuits are in need of additional judges. And the formula said Boone County had been in need of a judge for a long time, and just recently that position was created, and Judge Miller was appointed to fill that. So overall, how they're dividing things up currently, Judge Morrill was an associate judge, and she's been handling probate cases for a long time, and so she's still the probate judge handling those matters as a circuit judge. The other circuit judges split up the criminal caseload, the civil caseload, and the family caseload in different percentages among themselves, but they can handle any types of cases. Our associate circuit judges are Judge Pearman, Judge Shaw, Judge Tracy Gonzalez, and whoops, I skipped ahead. I can't quite see underneath of the little window. Judge Jackson Williams, and then in Callaway County. Yeah, I'm sorry, and Judge Sue Crane and Wilson. I'm sorry, Judge Wilson. I should know. He was the elected prosecutor in Callaway County before he ran for judge. And so those are our associate judges. Currently, the divisions are Judge Shaw and Judge Jackson Williams are handling criminal cases. Judge Gonzalez is handling juvenile cases, and Judge Pearman's handling family cases, civil cases, adult abuse docket. They all handle also a handful of just unusual things among them. But generally speaking, there's not a particular division that's assigned to a particular type of case. The presiding judge divides up the assignments based on what their needs are at the particular time. There are, in addition to the judges, there are 2 commissioners. There's Commissioner Gretchen Yancey, who's our family court commissioner, And then she's not in this picture, so she got a picture all by herself. And I gave her an arrow since I gave her is Commissioner Casey Clevenger, who's our treatment court commissioner. The commissioners are hired by the court en banc, and so they're essentially appointed by the presiding judge and approved by the court en banc. And they have a term that they serve, and then they come back up for review to see if the judge will renew them. And I would say we have got tremendous commissioners. Gretchen Yancey's got a lot of experience in family law. Casey Clevenger, I think probably people know Judge Christine Carpenter, who's retired now, who was a real pioneer in treatment courts, not just here in Missouri, but in the whole country. And Commissioner Clevenger has really carried that on, and it's a tremendous resource that we have here in Boone County to have the treatment courts that we do.
Are commissioners appointed, or how do they?
So they're appointed by the presiding judge and then approved by the court en banc, and so they're hired by the court en banc essentially. Yeah, and the court en banc is just the meeting of all the judges together. So they meet once a month. Usually it's at 5 o'clock, and they'll meet together. There's some things they have to vote on, like budgetary things, and so they get together and discuss issues that are ongoing with the court. And then one of the things that comes up that they have to vote on is commissioner appointments. Other questions I got. Other things I think it's important to explain about the division in the judges. The most complicated division really is in the criminal field, because the $25,000 is pretty easy to understand division. The criminal field is more complicated, and I think it's a good opportunity too to just talk about whose roles are what within that system. So the way that the criminal system is structured, it's divided up so that no individual has complete control over every part of the system. The initial step is the police officers, and they're in charge of doing an investigation, and they're the only individuals in the process that can take somebody into custody and arrest someone. And so the process usually starts, they'll complete their investigation, and then the officer completes a probable cause statement, and they send the probable cause statement over to our office. And these are all AI generated images. You can tell this one's a little bit older than the prior one, but they create a probable cause statement, they send it over to our office, and then one of our assistant prosecutors reviews that and makes a charging decision. The prosecutor's role in the process is charging the case, and we're the only ones in the process who can charge somebody with a crime. We're also the only ones in the process generally that can dismiss a case. And so that's our role in the process, is filing decisions. And then ultimately, if we find out that there's some reason not to go forward with the case, if we find evidence that maybe suggests that the person might not be the culpable party, we are allowed to dismiss the case at any time. Then our person creates a charging document, and a misdemeanor, it's an information, and a felony, it's a complaint, and we file that with the judge's office. Not a lot of people know that the judge's office and prosecutor's office, as well as the juvenile office, have an individual on call 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, basically all year, every minute of the day. The reason for that, for the prosecutor's office and the judges as well, is for search warrants. And so if there's search warrants in the evening, in addition to that, if you're arrested on a criminal charge and in custody, you have to be charged within 24 hours. It has to be brought before a judge. And so we have somebody on the weekend to do that. The judges also handle other things like adult abuse emergencies that come up at night. And so our office has grown to the point where we're only on call about 3.5 times a year, but it used to be much more than that. And you'll get calls during the week and wake you up at 2 a.m.
Is that for like a week at a time when you're on call?
Yeah. So essentially the judges follow that same schedule usually when they're signing the warrants. And so our person now electronically files our charging document, and it goes to one of the judges to review on a rotating basis. They'll look at the probable cause statement and the information and decide whether the charges are supported by the facts in the probable cause statement. Then the judge's role in the process is they're the only ones that can actually issue a criminal case. They're the only ones that can set bond. And ultimately, at the end of the day, they're the only ones that can sentence somebody. So the bond decisions, we usually make a recommendation to the judge, but ultimately the judges are the ones that are responsible for setting the bonds. And we do have some cases where the judges will say, there's something missing in the probable cause statement, and they'll send that back to us to do additional work on. But most of the cases, once they've gone through that initial process and are issued, they get assigned to an associate circuit judge. So all criminal cases initially get signed to an associate circuit judge, and the person will come in for an initial appearance. On a misdemeanor, they enter a plea at that point. In a felony, you can't plead until circuit court, but you make an initial appearance. The judge reviews bond at the initial appearance and then sets it out within a week for a second, more detailed review of the bond setting. Then they'll either set it on a misdemeanor. Eventually, it'll get set for bench trial in associate court. And if it's a felony, it has to move up to circuit court for disposition. And so that's the next step in the process, is that it'll get set for preliminary hearing. And either we have a preliminary hearing in front of the associate judge, the defendant waives the preliminary hearing, or the case can be presented to the grand jury. Once that happens, the case gets bound over to circuit court, and that's where the felony case really starts. The defendant is arraigned there, they enter a plea of guilty or not guilty, and then the case gets set for eventually for trial. Although sometimes I think people are curious about what takes so long in criminal cases. Part of it is because the police officers are usually continuing to investigate, especially complicated cases, and generating new evidence and materials throughout the development of the case. Our responsibility is to gather all that evidence and produce it to the defense. We have an obligation to try to get evidence that's in any government entity's possession that might have to do with the case. We're also responsible for trying to identify and collect anything that might be helpful to the defendant in the way that it maybe reduces the charges, reduces the sentencing that they might get, or shows that they don't, anything that might show they didn't do that. We're responsible for getting all that together and getting it to the defense counsel. And then the defense counsel has to do their own investigation, review those materials, and go out. And so that's usually what's going on this phase before the case gets set for trial, is all the investigation and work is being done. Eventually, though, it gets set for trial in circuit court, and then that's where it can be disposed of, or it can be pled. Mm-hmm.
You mentioned grand jury. How does that fit in the system?
So the grand jury it's provided by in Missouri, the presiding judge essentially is in charge of the grand jury. There are certain counties where the judge does not allow a grand jury. And then, of course, most people now, if they've heard of grand juries or paid attention to them, it's usually because of the issues that came out of St. Louis. The grand jury essentially hears evidence. So what we do is we present cases to the grand jury, they hear the evidence, and then they make a probable cause determination. But the presiding judge decides whether we're going to have a grand jury and when they're going to set. So here we have a grand jury that's seated once a quarter, and they meet every Friday. They're actually meeting this morning. So we don't use the grand jury like other cases. In the St. Louis situation, they presented the case to the grand jury. I think whether they wanted the grand jury to have a certain outcome or not, I'm not sure, but they essentially passed the buck to the grand jury to say, you all make the decision so that I don't have to be accountable for it. That's just not how we do it here. That if we have a case, especially if it's a case that's getting attention and people have a desire to know what's going on, ultimately I feel like that's my responsibility to make that choice and not try to pass the buck on to the grand jury. So we make a filing decision, and that's just not how we use the grand jury here. We use it more the critical things for the grand jury. We have 35 felonies a week usually that we're filing, and there's really not enough time for the associate judges to hear all those cases if they had to do all prelims. The other really complicating factor is that a couple years ago they changed the rule so that if somebody's in custody, they have to have their preliminary hearing set within 30 days. And we usually don't have the police reports by 30 days. We usually just have a probable cause statement. And so we don't know the witness names or contact information. And so sometimes we have to initially present to grand jury just to keep the case alive while we're working on gathering reports. And so a lot of times we'll submit it even multiple times.
I have another question. The grand jury, I'm not familiar with the setup at all. I've been called for regular jury trials. So are you saying somebody is called to serve on grand jury or serve for 3 months? Yeah.
And so the question was, do they serve for 3 months? I would say that's bad news if you get called in for grand jury selection. But I would tell you this, though. So it is easy enough to get off of grand jury or any jury, but we always have people that are interested in serving, and it is a really critical role. And I would say by the end of the process, the grand juries are very they're happy that they did that,
There's
because
a camaraderie, I would say.
there's a camaraderie that the regular juries aren't allowed to ask questions of the witnesses, but the grand jury does. And so they get to peek behind the curtain a little bit and see what's going on in the community. They hear, hundreds of cases of things that are going on that nobody knows about. And so usually it's a big commitment, but they usually, in my experience, come out of it with appreciating that they did that. Other things for us, as far as thinking about using the grand jury, is in a child sex case, you usually don't want to have your kid on the stand more than you have to for the trial. And so if you have to have a preliminary hearing and you have to put your child on the stand, that's really not ideal. The same thing for adult sex abuse victims. So there are just certain victims that you want to avoid having to put through the trauma of testifying as often as you can avoid it. In addition to that, we have undercover police officers. Sometimes additionally, the police officers work. A lot of times the crimes are happening at night and the preliminary hearings are either at 9 or 1:30. And so what we do is we have those overnight people get right on at 8:30 so that we can get them out of there. We set our schedule based on when the officers are working. Also, we have people in Department of Corrections that you'd have to pay 2 deputies to go down and pick them up and bring them back in order to have a preliminary hearing. So they're really not just because of the volume. There are a lot of other practical reasons why the grand jury is just very critical to the functioning of justice. And it also, all it really does is move the case on to circuit court. And then the reality now is, because the preliminary hearings have to be set so fast, the cases are going to be in circuit court for 6 months or so before they can be ready for trial in most cases.
Just one follow-up about this. So a indictment can come directly from the prosecutor, or it come directly from the grand jury.
It can, and so that's true. That I've got in this process, I have it set up
And
where
they're
it's going
equivalent.
through. Yeah. So that you can initiate a case just by presentation of the grand jury, and sometimes we'll do that where you have. They used to do this much more in the past, that they would do drug operations where they would have controlled buys, and they wouldn't actually move forward on the cases until they would do one big sweep, because once they do that, their informant that they've been working with is exposed. And so that we would, in the past, much more than we do now, initiate a prosecution through grand jury, and you can do that rather than having the first part of the process. It goes then straight to the circuit court.
And the grand jury, it sounds like, is a way of using more time in the process.
Well, no, it really, if the case is set for prelim and not bound over, it gets dismissed. And so it keeps the case moving. The kind of strange thing about the preliminary hearing, there's a lot of focus and resources spent on it, but the stakes are very low because the judge is just finding probable cause. And if for some reason the judge doesn't find the probable cause, maybe we didn't realize the witness we needed was a different person, we can refile it. And so there's a lot of focus on it, but the stakes are very low because the case can just be refiled if it's not bound over.
You mentioned family court, but I didn't hear juvenile court. Are they separate? Are they different? Or?
Yeah, so they're related, but they are separate. And so there are, in the juvenile realm, you have juvenile cases, juvenile delinquency, but then you also have juvenile cases where juveniles are in care of the state. And those a lot of times do overlap with family cases. But usually family cases, I would be talking about dissolutions, divorce cases, custody modifications, paternity cases. And the juvenile, currently Tracy Gonzalez does all the juvenile matters, and then the family judges mostly do the other matters.
Is abuse still in juvenile?
Yeah, so abuse and neglect for the juveniles who are in care and custody of the state would be handled by the juvenile court. But then you might have other proceedings related to like a dissolution or a custody matter that would be handled by the family court judges.
Abuse is criminal, though, right?
Yeah, and so you could even then have a third channel where you might have not every abuse case results in a criminal prosecution, but because the things that can constitute abuse and neglect may not always be a crime, but sometimes you will have also a criminal case pending related to the juvenile matter. So other questions that I got, and feel free to, it's more interesting for you all, I think, if I'm answering questions you have than just talking. And so feel free anytime to jump in. I was asked as well about, sorry, go ahead.
There was a question in the chat a while back. Maybe you answered this, but Dave Taylor asked, who appoints or elects the Columbia Municipal Judge?
So the
you
municipal judge, I believe, isn't appointed by the city council.
I believe that's true.
Or is he elected?
No, he's an executive speaker.
Okay, and I'm asking Melissa Buchanan. She used to be an attorney for the city of Columbia, and so in the past, some of our smaller cities. I live outside of Hallsville. Hallsville had a municipal judge that was elected, but we're thinking this is outside of my expertise. I would have to admit because I think lawyers are more specialized than people realize they are, and I almost never think about municipal ordinances or municipal court because it just doesn't really affect the work that we do. But the judge, I do know Judge Nosh is the judge, and the way that it affects us, he's got the community docket where he's working on trying to deal with some of the issues related to mental health and substance abuse that cause frequent issues. Any other questions about, or did I answer that? I may have gotten off point. One of the questions I had was about what the salary is for judges. So the salary for judges is set by statute, and then Missouri has a salary commission that adjusts salaries over time. At some point, the salary commission set judge salaries in Missouri as a percentage of federal magistrate judge salaries, and then the associate judge salaries are a percentage of that. As a prosecutor, my salary is tied to the associate judge salary, so my salary is the same as an associate judge would be. But it's the way that it's decided is by statute. So. Next, I had questions about the judges' limits on their ability to socialize and conduct business. So all lawyers are governed by the rules of professional conduct, and they're very detailed and extensive about the things that lawyers can and can't do. Judges as lawyers are subject to those rules of professional conduct, but I would say half of the rules have to do with client interactions, duties to clients, and those things don't really apply to judges. They don't necessarily always apply to us as prosecutors. But the judges also have a separate set of rules called the Judicial Code of Conduct that has standards that they have to file in addition to the general ethical rules for attorneys. And mostly those things are about making sure that the court operates impartially and that the judge isn't doing something that's going to bring the justice system into disrepute, or cause inefficiency. So, for example, the judges might not be able to have investments in a company that causes them to have to recuse frequently off of cases, or they can't really operate a business outside of their judge work. They have to do things that would avoid conflicting with their judge roles, and also things that would cause them to develop a conflict in a case to be recused. And they have to make sure they're not doing things that bring shade and shame onto the justice profession. So they can still socialize, but you just have to be cautious to make sure that you're keeping your socialization within professional limits. You also, and this is something both in the ethical rules for attorneys and for the judges, you can't talk with the judges about any pending case outside of court with the other side present. And so that gets people in trouble a lot of times because the things that we're doing sometimes are interesting or weird and people want to talk about it, but you can't talk with the judge about it unless the opposing attorney is there because it gives the other side a fair chance to respond to what's being said. So those are, I would say, the main limitations. Every year, judges as well as any elected official, we have to file a financial disclosure statement with the state to make sure that we don't have some kind of conflict of interest related to our position. And then the other real main difference between judges and other attorneys is judges can't do solicitations. So you can't go to charity events. You can't, if you're running for judge, you can't ask for campaign funds. I don't know that this is exactly clear in the rules. It doesn't explicitly say this, but the other judges all do tell me that you can't go to individual candidate events, that you can go to party events, but you can't go to individual candidate events when they're running for election. So, oops, sorry, I skipped ahead. Oh, that was my next slide of judges socializing. So, but there are other limitations on what you can donate money to. You can't donate money to individual candidates, but you can donate money to the party. So there are some other limitations like that. Any other questions about the judge part before I transition? I think I'm exactly on time, although I always talk too fast, I know. And so if I'm talking too fast, tell me to slow down.
Oh, here's a question. What percentage of criminal cases are juvenile versus adult? I mean, you can ballpark it. What is the ratio of criminal case defendants before the circuit what percentage criminal cases are for drug offenses? We can slow down and I can read those one at a time.
So those are all interesting questions. The juvenile side, I don't actually know the answer to those questions because our office only sees the cases that are referred to us. And so if the case is referred for juvenile prosecution and it stays in juvenile court, we wouldn't even know about it.
Yeah.
We're only involved once somebody is certified. I would say, and you've probably heard in the news a lot about this, that a larger percentage now of our violent crimes and shootings are juvenile related than my experience has been in the past in the community. As far as the racial ratio, we don't actually track that. And I'm sure that there may be police department tracking statistics like that, but our system's not designed to track that. We did partner with the Justice Department, and they had a program called Justice Counts that we were working on developing some statistics like this. And then, like, unfortunately, many programs, they lost their funding. And so we just had barely started getting off the ground with that, and then their grant was cut. But that's something.
And then the drug offenses, what percentage do you think are drug offenses?
But before I move on about the racial makeup, and I guess maybe the drug cases too, I think those we're interested in. One of the projects we're interested in is doing better at tracking statistics and knowing what's going on within the office. And so, like, time to disposition and other factors that we look at to try to make sure that the office is operating healthily. Percentage of criminal cases that are drug offenses, I don't know percentage wise, and we just went through the budget process. As part of our budget process, we look at these kind of numbers every year. The drugs aren't a significant percentage of the overall cases, but there are a large number of drug cases. People are always shocked when I talk about how many cases we have. We get about 850 case referrals a month at our office, and we file about 850 cases. The juvenile, or the part of the thing that the Justice Department was looking at, is how those cases move through the system. And the good news is we're resolving most of them in a timely manner. We have had several years. One of the statistics I look at is disposition based on versus filing cases. In most of the last 10 years, we filed more cases than we disposed of. And so your caseload goes up and up. There are lots of complicated reasons for that, but it's a balance, because you have to make sure that we're handling the cases in an appropriate way. You can't say, yeah, we're just going to move these cases to be moving cases. That we're really here to try to accomplish something, but it is important for us to keep an eye on those type of numbers.
So Roger, do you have any idea, as a percent of population, the number of criminal cases we have in Columbia compared to our urban areas? Because we're being accused by the university. We have so much crime. We have so much. So do you have any idea of that?
So I don't know about that. And that's unfortunately one of the things the Justice Count project was supposed to help us with. That one of the ways we were hoping to be able to benefit is we could compare ourselves directly with other jurisdictions. We would feed our budget information, personnel information in there, and we could be able to say, like, compared to other jurisdictions of our size, how does our personnel stack up? How does our spending stack up? So I don't actually know the answer to that right now, but I think there are statistics that would indicate that. And overall, I would say that in the trends that we see, and I probably have, well, I'm not on my office computer, but overall referrals are mostly, if you strike a trend line over the last 15 years, they're mostly flat. They're just slightly up. But you see a significant downturn in the middle of that period of time, and then now they're moving back up. And I would attribute that almost entirely to staffing at the Columbia Police Department, that there was just a period of time where the police department enforcement went way down. They had a lot of staff members leaving. And so our referrals went way down. The Columbia Police Department's a significant percentage of our overall referrals. And so that's, if it hadn't been for that, I would expect that the trend would have been upwards more significantly. Now that staffing levels are increasing, I would expect that it's going to go up substantially, just because the number of arrests are correlated to the number of police officers on the street. So,
Did you say it took more than 30 days for a police report to reach your office? And has it always been that way?
So I would say it's mixed, and part of that is because of the system they use now has a supervisor review component, and so they send it to their supervisor. It has to be reviewed, sent back to them, and that usually takes about that long to go through that process. So we can, for the grand jury cases, for example, the case I had on this morning, I just sat down with the detective and go through the case with them before we present it, so that we know what we're doing and what we're talking about. but we usually don't have the full set of reports yet at that point in the process. It takes a long time to get everything together. We've also, one of the things we've had good success with is coordinating with the domestic detectives at the agencies to try to get domestic victim contact information faster, because that's always been a challenge, that we want to be able to contact victims before the defendant gets out of custody and safety plan with them. And we've made good progress on that. I think now we have a direct pipeline to the detectives to get us that information. But that's an area where there's some delays. And then I got off track of something else I was talking about. Was there another question that I got? Statistics overall. I would say for the most part, there's some small volume caseloads, like sexual offenses are generally relatively small. And so small fluctuations look like crazy fluctuations in the numbers. But the larger caseloads, generally everything is either flat or trending slightly down, except for felony assaults, and domestic assaults are generally trending up over time, is my overall assessment. In homicide cases, in 2017, there was just a tremendous spike in homicide cases, and this year it's gone substantially down, but that's been a major trend, I would say, over the last 10 years has been a number of homicide cases. Any other questions? Mm-hmm.
I served on a jury once, I selected for a jury, and when we were in the meeting room, they said we used the term voir dire, but that's not the correct term. In Boone County, they use a different term, and I wondered why, and what it is and why.
So the question was, what do we call jury selection and why? So Judge Crane actually used to joke about how we pronounce voir dire, because it's a French word, and it's just by tradition that people call jury selection voir dire. Or voir dire, but it's I think better to just call it jury selection, and so but lawyers still call it voir dire just because that's our habit of doing that. Anybody else? All right, if not, the next part I was asked to talk a little bit about the campaign, and at this point, no one else has filed. Filing, of course, is not until March. Yeah, yay! So. Can't really control what other people are doing, just trying to do the best that I can on controlling the things I can control. So I thought it'd be much more fun than to talk about the campaign, which is going very slowly, and instead do a little photo bio, because hopefully that's fun. Maybe I'll be wrong about that, but I realize that we don't really know a lot about most of our elected officials and public servants, and so I just thought this might be fun for me, maybe, and you guys will put up with it. So, I'm sorry. So I'll go through a little bit of the bio for myself.
You look the same.
Thank you. So I actually grew up in Macomb, Missouri, which is south central Missouri, in a fairly rural area. So this is our post office there in Macomb. And then I actually lived outside of Macomb, out in the country a little bit. This place here in the middle is the farm, essentially, where I grew up. It's 35 acres here, and then our house is down here at the bottom. When I was little, we had chickens. I remember we had just so many chickens at our house. And my dad tells me it's because he went to one of our uncle's house, and they had all these chickens, and they asked if they wanted some, and they ended up collecting. It was a way for my uncle to offload all these roosters onto my dad, and so we had all these roosters when I was little. But we grew up in a little trailer home there in the country, and this is my mom and brother and myself and grandpa. And it was peaceful. We couldn't see our neighbors from our house. The main conflict was that, and I'll show the slides here in a minute, that we had hogs. Sometimes they would get out, and our immediate neighbor, it was a constant source of potential conflict with them. Growing up in the country, there were some things that I think are significantly different just about the way of life that we had. That we didn't have a washing machine. When I was little, I remember we did have this washing machine, which is an outside agitator with a roller. And yeah, this is my mom showing some of our cousins how this machine works. And there's the clothesline there, of course, behind it. Huge upgrade though from having to go into town to do the laundry. But that machine eventually, you can see it's quite old already there.
My mother regretted giving up that machine.
It worked. It did the job. So.
Yeah. On nice days, it was great.
Right. When I was little, so my dad raised feeder pigs, and so that was a big part of our life as kids. Is we'd have litters of pigs, feeding the pigs. This was during the 80s, and then large animal operations took off, and it was difficult to be competitive against those kind of operations. And so eventually we got out of the pig raising market. My dad, though, mostly was a carpenter. I would say agriculturally wise, where I was from, the soil's not good. It's mostly animal agriculture, and mostly people do it as an additional source of income rather than their primary. Although there are some people, especially dairy farmers there, who primarily is their livelihood. Speaking of dairy farming, so my mom worked for a dairy farmer down the road, and my brother and I would feed the calves that were born, and then we got paid actually by we get the steers, and that was our compensation for feeding the calves. Other things growing up in the country, we didn't actually have, we had wood heating, and we cooked by wood until I left for college, and they lost 50% of their wood choppers and haulers. And so I would say as a kid, I just hated hauling in wood, and my dad would say, "Oh, think about the pies that we're going to make with this wood." And I would think, "That's great, Dad." But this is when I was very little. I had two half sisters who live with us, and that'll come back up in the story later. This is one of their birthdays. Another thing was interesting, well, and I guess related to the heat, we also didn't have air conditioning until I left for college, and maybe they just didn't like me, but now I can't even imagine how we survived like that, because I never noticed it then, but now. Another unusual thing is our Christmas tree, we would just cut a cedar tree down in the field, and so now for me the smell of cedar trees is really the smell of Christmas time. Our grandparents, they would take all of our cousins and us camping for a week. That was a big activity for my brother and I when we were kids. Then eventually I went on and came here to University of Missouri, studied political science, where I met our own Professor Herb Tillema. And it was very hard to find a picture of Professor Tillema. This is the only one I could find online. I tried to find one from back when I was in school. So studied political science here. And then I was involved in student government, and I would say I was disillusioned at that time with government, because I went into it thinking that kind of idealistically that we debate issues and we come to a greater understanding. And then in college, I was just exposed to very political people, and that was a really turnoff for that. One of my friend was running for student president, and then somebody on the opposing side, I remember calling in and reporting their car was parked illegally so that it would get towed, and it was just really petty.
Did you go to University of Missouri?
I did. Mm-hmm. And so really I transitioned from being interested in politics and so I graduated here from the University of Missouri. Transitioned from there into I took a gap year, and in Northern Illinois I worked at Monsanto doing quality assurance on seeds. And then our friend's family has an orchard there, and so they have a haunted orchard, and that's me in the gorilla costume. So that I worked at the Monsanto and at the orchard on the spare time, and then decided that I would go to law school. So went to law school at the University of Washington University in St. Louis. And then one of the real tremendous things, I think, of the ability there is my grandpa lived in St. Charles, and so we would have breakfast every week. I had one day where I just didn't have classes, and we'd have breakfast every week, and then go back to his house and read the newspaper. And that was very it was a good experience, I think, there. After law school, came back here to Columbia. My brother and sister-in-law live here, so I stayed with them while I was studying for the bar, and had a job at the Attorney General's office doing criminal appeals. So I spent a couple years doing criminal appeals. The benefit of that work, and I try to encourage people who are interested in becoming prosecutors to do that, because I spent all that time, 8 hours a day, just reading cases. And if I came across a case that was interesting, I'd just read it. In private practice, by comparison, if I came across a case I was interested in but wasn't pertinent to my task, I can't bill for that, and I have to move on. So it was a real benefit, I think, to just be able to really dig into the criminal law. In law school, they don't really teach you how to do anything except for write and read cases. And so it's a tremendous opportunity, I think, to get some background in the law. But worked under, at that time, Attorney General Jay Nixon. And then came to the Boone County Prosecutor's Office, where I was an assistant there for many years. I did, at one point, I had a friend who was working for Ed Council representing school districts, and asked me if I'd be interested in joining them, and hadn't ever been in private practice. And so I worked there for about a year, representing school districts, doing employment law, contract law, general counsel advising work, as well as some civil litigation on the defense side. And of all the work I've done, I would say on the legal side, I would say contracts is probably my least favorite, because it doesn't seem very lawyerly. You're just looking to see, are there certain things that are legal that you can't agree to, and then the other things is just maybe a bad idea, but your client can do it if they want to do it. And the criminal law is much more about, here's the rule, you have to follow the rule. And then, of course, you all know, and I've talked before about the challenges of the prosecutor's office, and we're aware of the mental health struggles related to work in the field, and the way that working with these type of cases all the time has an effect on mental health. I had left the office in a year that after I left, half the people in the office left that year. Over the course of 2 years, we had 100% turnover at the office. And over the course of the next year, we'd have lunch with the people who were leaving and talk to them about just how things were going. And eventually I got to the point where I thought, somebody's got to try to do something here. I tried to recruit other people to run, and nobody was going to do it. And so it got right down to the end, and I thought, if I don't try to do something, nobody's going to try to do anything. So I filed, and then ultimately ended up here where I am now. So initially, this wasn't my plan to do, but have been at the prosecutor's office now for a total. It's hard for me to keep track because I was gone for about a year at counsel, was gone for about a year or so at. I worked at Van Matry doing mostly family law dissolutions, and I did an adoption, which is the really nice part of family law, and did some criminal defense and a little general civil litigation. But here's my 10-year pin they gave me at the county when I was there for 10 years. So I took a picture of that. Then the really big change in our life was that in 2013, my niece, she was 4, came to live with us. Here we are doing some fun activities. And then we actually ended up adopting her. And this is the adoption here at the Boone County Courthouse. And so that's kind of special. We ring the bell, even though people in the courthouse hate when they don't necessarily hate when they do that, but every time they're like kids out there ringing the bell. And it was us on that day having a little bit of celebration. So like I mentioned, my brother and sister-in-law live here in town. They're teachers. My sister-in-law does the speech and debate for Columbia Public Schools, and then my brother is doing Triple E. Other claim to fame for my brother is that he's made his own raccoon hats, and so you periodically will see him in the stands of the university games wearing his hat that he made, because they think, who's this big ugly guy with this crazy hat on? And so he periodically gets some exposure for that. Savannah has grown up a lot now. She's 15. She'll be 16 in February, and she's on the Hallsville cheerleader team, which I'll do a plug. They've won state 3 years in a row. And we do have 2 dogs, and we trialed having the dogs come to the office for victim support. We had some really good success for that. We're on the list for a trained facility dog, but it takes a long time. We're actually past due for when they said they would have the dog for us. But the victims coming in, especially kids, they're at the courthouse for a long time. I think as attorneys, we forget sometimes that I go in the courthouse. Oh, I'm sorry. Are you asking a question or just?
Oh, no.
Okay.
I do have a question. So you commute from Hallsville?
Yeah, from Hallsville. My wife lived from Hallsville. But
going to some of Bacon's things, it's a ways.
It's a ways, but half of my drive is in the city of Columbia, and half is out because of all the stoplights in town. That once you get outside of town, it's smooth sailing. But victims come in as attorneys. We go in the courthouse all the time and just lose track of the fact that for most people, it's scary to go in the courthouse. Most people, I don't think that I'm scary to talk to. I don't think Melissa's scary to talk to, but lay people who come in don't know us, and it's scary for them. And so having the facility dog, I think, will be a benefit. So our dogs, Trixie and Liz Lemon, tried it out for a while. But they wanted to be by me too much, and they didn't want to go by the victims. Also, Liz Lemon is treat crazy, and so as soon as we get there, she'd run office to office asking for treats and
And getting them probably.
getting them right. The most positive experience we had, there was one victim who had a Yorkie and picked up Trixie and held her upside down like a baby and rubbed her belly. And so we did have some positive interactions in a way that I think it's a good direction for us to move in. But it's slow. I would say this too. It's something that's been on our project list for probably 10 years. And the challenge for us with projects is we have all these cases we have to try. And so for me, for example, I've got a trial Tuesday and then I got a murder trial January 13th. And when that happens, it's like very hard to do these other types of projects. So the caseload, we ultimately just have to get under control.
I'm obsessed with this. So if you get the dog, is someone in the office assigned to that dog and they take it home at night and they're like responsible for adopting it, sort of?
So Yali has volunteered to be our assistant prosecutor. Yali has volunteered to be the dog host.
Whatever.
And then one of the difficulties are with the informal trial, anybody can pet the dogs, play with them at any time. The facility dog is a working dog, and so there are lots of rules about like when you can pet them, when you can play with them. But I think one of the big benefits will be that they're trained to just sit there by the victim, whereas these two knuckleheads, they won't do that. So
not trainable for that.
yeah. So that's I guess how I ended up here. You know, I've been prosecutor and really enjoyed that opportunity. And I'm proud of the work we've done there. I think that we've gotten things back on track in a lot of ways, but there's of course a lot of work still to do. Jose Caldera asked me actually if I'd be interested in running for the judge position, and I went back and forth for a long time, and then ultimately decided. I think, like I said, it just hadn't been my goal to. I really love prosecuting cases. It just hadn't necessarily been my goal to be the prosecutor. And the judge position, I think, is an opportunity that I can do something really good for the community, and also maybe not be in the spotlight quite as much as I currently am. I would say too, the people in our office and the people who do this kind of work are doing it because they care about the community and want to do better. The unfortunate reality is all of my assistants could go into private practice and make twice as much as they do doing the work that we do, but they do it because they care about it. And so we're building a good team, and I don't know, fingers crossed, I'm hoping to be able to move into this new transition and stage in life. And then I do have here, if you're interested, this is just a picture of my website, and then I've got a QR code here that if you want to take a look. I've built the website myself, and I'm certainly no web developer. So I've got some content on there, but I need to do better with dedicating some time to pretty it up a little. So
we have an online question. Dave Taylor asks, if you leave the prosecutor's office, is there someone who can fill your position?
Yeah, so that was part of the reason for announcing very early, is that I wanted to make sure. I certainly didn't want to leave the prosecutor's office in a worse position, and so wanted to make sure that we had a good transition plan. And so Melissa Buchanan is here. She's actually running for, has announced that she's running for prosecutor, and she's our head prosecutor right now. Our head assistant. She's in charge of the legal side and supervises the assistant prosecutors. Any other questions? Mm-hmm.
Can you still remember what a brand new baby pig smells like?
Yes, I can actually, and it smells like wet hay a little bit, I think. But no, definitely, yeah. There's a distinct experience going through a pig giving litter. So,
My dad was to bring. I smelled really nice by that.
Yeah, we rarely had them in the house, but we did sometimes have little ones that ran around. And we had one particular pig that all of us kids just loved when we were kids. And the I guess tragic part of all this is that it is a business, and we called her. It was a female. We called her Tony Pig, and they brought Tony Pig to sell while we were at school one day. So it's just the circle of the way that things operate. And then we had cows that we raised up, and but yeah, definitely it's an experience to go through.
Herb has got his hand up. Maybe he's going to harass you about that photo. Herb, I think we can hear you. Go for it. Herb, you ready to ask your question?
Yes, indeed. Thank you, Roger, for coming today, and it's good to see you again, despite the scary picture of me. I wonder if you could help me. A couple of members of the bench have suggested to me that there's been an increase in the number of trials before associate court and circuit. And I wonder if you could put a handle on that for me. I can get the caseload data, but I can't get a handle on whether the numbers they mention are high or low by comparing them across the state per capita, whatever.
Yeah. So by comparison, and recently Judge Devine did a state of the circuit presentation for the Boone County Bar. Overall, in across all categories, I think our judges are quite busy compared to judges in other parts of the state. When it comes to trials, it's mostly circuit judges, but I would say over the last, and I have a chart in my budget documents about number of trials over the years. In 2008, when I started, there were somewhere around 20 trials. And over the next several years, the trial numbers went down and down and down and down to the point that in COVID, of course, the court was shut down for a significant part of the year. But it's really a kind of a straight line down to the point in COVID where we were only trying 8 cases a year. The difficulty with that is that some of that is, I think, because they were moving cases without having people on board. They had to move cases in order to just stay in survival mode. So some of the things we've tried to do is change the mindset of the assistants from thinking about what recommendation do I need to make to get a plea deal in this case to what's the fair recommendation in this case. We have cases where, in instances where we have somebody who's done something bad, they have a terrible criminal history, and we have strong evidence that they did it. And those cases are more likely to end up being for trial. Though our motivation is to try to seek justice and not just try to move cases through the system. So I do think that's part of it. The other part of it is that we're working on strategies for trying to get a handle on our caseload as the prosecutor's office. And one of the challenges we've had is that the defense attorneys, it's a benefit to them to delay the case as long as they want. When the caseload is high, it's very hard for us to stop them from doing that because, this week we had 20 cases set for trial. Next week we'll have 20 cases set for trial. And you can't do a case every week. It takes even on a simple case a couple of weeks to get it ready for trial. In murder case, you're talking 6 months to get it ready for trial, and then 2 months of doing nothing but working on the murder case. And so you just can't do that many trials. So we're up against the ropes essentially, I think. And one of the things that we've worked on to try to avoid that is avoiding the incentive for defense attorneys to wait until the last minute to work out a plea, because we had situations where they would wait to see if we were going to say we're ready for trial or not. And then they would, if we're ready, they would want a continuance. And if we're not ready, they would jump in and say, no, we want to do the trial. And we even had instances where they would say, oh, we're ready for trial, we're objecting to a continuance. Then we would turn around and work hard, get the thing ready for trial, come back the next week. Oh, no, now we need a continuance. So we wanted to try to stop this game of chicken where it's very inefficient for us to be preparing for all these trials that aren't going. They're never going to be tried. No one's intending on the defense to try them, but they're playing this game of chicken. So one of the things I've done is cut off earlier the deadline for when defendants can accept a recommendation. And to make that effective, we have to hold the line, and that results in some increased trial. So I think it's both a combination of now we have some really talented trial attorneys. I think we're toughening up the recommendations in certain classes of cases, and we're holding the line on not allowing last minute deals. So this year we're going to have nearly 50 trials, I think. So twice as many as we've had in most of the last 10 years.
So another obtuse question. So are a lot of your criminal cases with public defenders defending them? Because we all hear how they're swamped and they have too many caseloads.
Yeah, so most of them I would say are public defenders. The public defenders, I would just tell you this. I had to talk to a public defender who had worked as a prosecutor in our office, and he said it's night and day, that it's nothing there like it is at our office as far as the caseload goes. But I think it's apples and oranges. So mixing metaphors, because we spend less work on each case than they do because they've got to have client contact, work with their clients. So I don't really know. I've heard less pressure lately about the public defenders. I know that because of salary issues, they have a difficult time recruiting and retaining employees as well. But I think there's less attention. And actually, Melissa Buchanan was a public defender as well. So you could probably tell better than I could what the experience is like.
Yeah, I think it's gotten better as the public defender's office has got more funding. They've been able to retain more talent as turnover, of course, about your clients. They're no longer required. When I was public defender, you had a conflict county as well. So I was assigned to Boone County, then I had to drive over once a week to Beaver County, conflict work there, which of course is a huge time suck. They're not doing that any longer. They have enough money to hire private attorneys to do conflict work, lower caseload. So I think the situation has improved as funding.
Great.
Yeah, so overall, sounds like things are getting better. I would say, just a plug for the public defenders, that sometimes defendants are saying, "Oh, I don't want a public defender," and we do, of course, have some very talented private criminal defense attorneys in town. But the public defenders, that's all they do all day long, and in my experience, they're generally very good attorneys. So, sorry, another question?
Just a quick question. You were the Boone County prosecutor, but I didn't realize that you're not the only one who prosecutes all the states. All the cases, you've got staff works under you.
Yeah.
Staff.
So at the prosecutor's office, we've got 17 attorneys. One of them just does child support work under a grant. So we have 16 general prosecutors at the office, and we have each of those works with an investigator and a legal assistant. But the legal assistants and investigators work with several. So we have 9 legal assistants, 4 investigators, plus some investigators that are serving process on witnesses. Then we divide the cases up based on type. Oh, we have a victim response team too that works with one of the prosecutors is assigned to a victim advocate. And then we divide the cases up by type of cases. And so we have some people who are handling, one of the things that we've done in the office is, as the office has grown, in the time that I've been there, it's gone from a relatively small office to a kind of medium-ish office. And the administrative burden is different than it used to be. And so we actually did some restructuring. So now we are divided into units. We have a violent crime unit with an attorney leading that. We have a property and traffic unit when an attorney leads that. And then we have our special victim unit with an attorney there too. So then when cases come in, they get assigned based on the type of case they are.
I just want to point out that we reached the 1 o'clock hour where we asked you to stay. Obviously, people still have questions if you have time.
Sure, yeah, and happy to stay around and ask questions. I appreciate you all inviting me here to talk. I'm always happy if you have something that I can help talk about. I'm always happy to do that. So thank you all very much.
Related question to that, one of the Schneebergers asks, will you still be able to come to Muleskinners and speak to us once you're on the bench?
I think so. Yeah, well, and I would tell you this, that I don't get invited that often to talk, but I've never turned anybody down who's asked me to talk. And so as a judge, I think it's the same thing. I feel like if I'm wrong, I'll educate myself. But yeah. I do think that that's part of our responsibility as public servants to let people know what we're doing, help make the process more transparent. So my hope is yes.
Great. We're all caught up on the chat questions.
Just real quick, this kind of goes back to the first half. You talked about the presiding judge splitting up the cases kind of equally. I'm guessing that's based on number of cases, but then cases are going to have different workloads.
Right. Yeah, it's based on number of cases, but also just expertise that the judges might have in certain areas. But I do know that that's one of the things they look at is trying to balance the workload between the different judges. And similar for us, though, one of the things Melissa does for our office is she tries to make sure that everybody's equally suffering under the intense caseload. No one person's not more than another.
5 or 20 or whatever to each person, but some of those are sure going to take a lot more work
than
others. And
right.
You know that ahead?
On the prosecutor side or the judge side?
Way, yeah.
So yeah, I would say it's hard to predict, but we roughly try to make an estimate of what how many burglaries is equivalent to how many traffic cases. And some of it is just experience doing all those things to get an idea for what's too much for one person to do. Really, the thing that we have that is too much right now are homicide cases. So we're trying to work our way down. And last I checked, we were under 50, but we only have a couple people who have experience in handling homicide cases. I would say an experienced homicide prosecutor should have 6 homicide cases because that's about how many that you can work on in a year. And all of our homicide prosecutors, including myself, have many more than that. So.
I want to thank you for mentioning what was really important when your name comes up about the mental health of your colleagues and your staff and that sort of thing. I want to thank you for service to our county as prosecutor. And I wonder if those kind of issues are things that you intend to continue to be interested in if you're on the bench.
Yeah, I would say so. And I don't know to the extent that judges experience the same thing because they spend probably less time scrutinizing everything rather than presiding over like multiple hearings, especially associate judges. So I would say yes, and it's something that our profession overall has just become more aware of. We actually, in the year that we lost Dan Knight, we had another prosecutor take his life in another county here in Missouri, and so it is challenging. And then I would say I notice that I'm more suspicious of people probably than I should be, and I expect my house isn't going to be burglarized, even though overall the community's much safer than it appears based on what you hear all the time are unusual things happening. And so when something unusual happens, it gets in the news, and then it makes it seem like that's the normal thing to happen. But certainly there's no shortage of criminal offenses to keep us busy, though, at the same time.
Melissa, what's your last name again?
Buchanan.
Buchanan, okay.
So until Donald Trump, James Buchanan was the worst president. Remember it that way. I don't know. He told me the second part.
Anybody else have any questions?
That was great. We're all caught up on mine.
Well,
All right. Well, thank you all. I do appreciate it.
Thank you.
As a graduate student, I was involved with suing the University of California for recognition of our graduate union. It was a big deal. Long administrative hearings, that sort of thing. And right toward the end, the general counsel from the university jumped off the Golden Gate Bridge. It just,
Is that what he said?
somebody at the height of a legal career, I just couldn't believe it. And
The Missouri Bar actually has a division that's devoted to issues of mental health and then substance abuse.
my two sisters and one niece have been very involved in legal work, and they talk about this issue a lot. And nobody wants to sort of air their laundry or embarrass any family or anything like that. But I do think that I don't know how you handle it in talking to people, but you have particular remit and particular experience there. I really appreciate it.
Something, unfortunately, is you kind of get desensitized a